in chapter 7, we talked about this chapter before, is that John gets to see a vision. And he sees people from more people than he can ever count. And he sees people from every tribe and nation and tongue. And what are they doing? They're praising God. And guess what they have in their hands? Palm branches. And they're waving palm branches. So from John's perspective, I can imagine that as he's writing this, and when he wrote Revelation, he wrote Revelation after this gospel, after this good news letter. But you can imagine when John was writing out about Revelation, he was remembering what happened with Jesus at this time. So verse 10. So when he entered Jerusalem, all the city was astir, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowd, excuse me, and the crowd was saying, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee." Now stop right there. Who are these people that were saying that? Well, if you go back and you read the other Gospels, you'll find out that a lot of the people that came that were witnesses of Lazarus rising from the dead. And oh, by the way, it also says in John that the religious leaders were not only really against Jesus, but they also wanted to kill Lazarus again because of what happened. So the religious leaders wasn't even happy that Lazarus rose from the dead. But a lot of those folks that came up to Jerusalem because of the feast that was getting ready to happen, is they came along and they were along, and so when the people were asking, "Who is this?" a lot of those folks were pointing back to Jesus because they were the ones that were witnesses of what happened with Lazarus. So Jesus enters the temple, and for the second time, because again, if you go to John, you'll find out in John chapter 2, when Jesus first started his ministry, he walks into Jerusalem. So this is not the first time Jesus goes into Jerusalem. Although Matthew doesn't record a lot of visits to Jerusalem, if you read John, you'll find out that Jesus had actually been to Jerusalem at least 3 times, possibly 4 times, according to that gospel. So, but the first time that Jesus goes into the temple, he does the very same thing that he's going to do here. So he goes into the temple and he drives out all those who were buying and selling in the temple, overturning the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he said to them, "It is written," again he's quoting from Isaiah, he says, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers." Now, let's kind of just talk about who exactly is making it a den of robbers?
The money changers.
The money changers? Okay, that's one of them.
The people who are selling doves.
The ones that are selling doves.
The Pharisees.
Why?
They're allowing it to happen, even though it's supposed to be against religion.
Okay, that too, but there's also another reason from the Pharisees. Think about this. The religious leaders, huh?
They were probably getting a kickback.
They were getting a kickback, but not only that, but they were basically a house of thieves in the first place because they had the treasures. They had the knowledge. But instead of giving it to God, they kept the knowledge to themselves and they only shared what they wanted to share with the people so they could hold their own positions. And so that den of thieves was not just all those that we talked about, but it was the religious leaders at the time because they were basically thieves against God. It's like they have the knowledge and yet they don't share it. And again, I told you before, and I always will say that you can't ever point one finger at somebody without 3 fingers back at you. We have to stop and think. Are we serving as a den of thieves in our own lives, having the knowledge of what salvation is all about and yet holding on to it and not willing to share it? Just a thought. So, after this, and that's kind of interesting, and the blind and the lame came to him in the temple and he healed them. So what happens is he goes in there and he knocks out all the tables, he drives out these money changers and everything else, and the next thing what happens is he actually does what's supposed to be going on in the church in the first place. And that's to bring people in who need healing. So while he's there in the temple, yes, he drives out everything, but what's the next step that he does? He begins to heal the blind and the lame who came to him at the temple, and he begins to heal them. And when the chief priest, verse 15, and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he had done, and the children were shouting in the temple, "Hosanna," again, save us, to the Son of David, they became what?
My boss says indignant.
Indignant. Or what's another word? What's another translation?
You said 15?
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah, 15, the end of 15. they became indignant also? Okay. What's indignant mean?
This right here says they were up in arms.
Okay. So up in arms, indignant. What was going on here? Why were they so indignant to it? Why were they so up in arms?
Oh, he cut them off right then and cost them money.
Well, it cost them money.
He was getting recognition that they weren't getting.
I mean, think about
He was
this.
getting praise.
He was healing. I mean, and the thing is, you'll read later on, and we've already read. So I can't remember again. I read all the 4 Gospels, but I mean, the religious leaders, they really didn't like Jesus at all, even though they knew Scripture, even though they knew Isaiah. They did not want to recognize Jesus as being the Son of God. And Jesus is constantly saying, hey, if you look at me, if you see me, and we're going to get here in a second when they question his authority, you see me, you've seen the Father. You know, he told them in John, I think it's chapter 8, they were questioning him. And Jesus says, hey, look, before Abraham, I am. Boy, that flew him off. Because what do you mean Abraham's your father? How do you know Abraham? And he goes, well, I'll tell you why I am. Before Abraham, I am. And then when he used that word, I am, that really flipped him off. Because you have to go back to Exodus when Moses is going there and saying, hey, when the Jews ask, what's your name? And why would the Jews ask that? Because they've been living in Egypt with all this pagan gods and everything else. And every pagan god has some sort of a name. So when Moses says, hey, when they come in and say, what's your name? Moses was kind of expecting, well, my name's John or something, some name. And God doesn't do that. He says, I am who I am. Period. I'm God. I'm not going to give you, come on in.
Come on, bro.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't know what time it started.
Yeah.
I killed about 30 minutes at that light down there, 16 and 7.
Yes. Especially at this time.
Yeah.
So he says, we're in chapter 21
Oh, Matthew?
of Matthew, right?
Okay.
So he sits there, and so, he said, God tells Moses, he says, I don't have a name. My name is God. I am the God. I'm the creator of everything. So you tell the people, I am who I am, period. And so, when Jesus tells them and tells the religious leaders, hey, before Abraham, I am, that flipped them off also. They were just, they could not grasp. And I don't understand how they could. Maybe Paul can explain this, but I can't figure out, well, how do they ever expect the Messiah to show up in the first place if he's not going to show up in a human form? But for some reason,
It's called stupid.
Simple.
so, but the bottom line is here's Jesus, and Jesus would tell, he would heal somebody, but don't tell people what that happened. Because he didn't want the Jews to get ahead of God's plan. He wanted to do his ministry. He was. Yet when he met the woman at the well, and the woman says, "Who are you?" Or it says about the Messiah, and Jesus tells her flat out, "I am the Messiah." And then she goes off and tells the rest, "Hey, we found the Messiah." So it wasn't Jesus wasn't afraid to tell that he was the Messiah. But when he actually told to the religious leaders, they didn't want to believe it at all. And so they become indignant. In other words, this is going to mess up, as you said, Phil, this is going to mess up their whole system. Because here I am, I've got all the authority, I'm the big leader, I've got all these people underneath me and everything else, I don't want to be subjected to this guy. They didn't really want to be subjected to God, period. So it hadn't really changed in all these hundreds of years with the Jews. So verse 16, and he said to them, and they said to him, "Do you hear what these children are saying?" And Jesus said to them, "Yes. Have you not ever read, out of the mouth of infants and nursing babies, you will prepare praise for yourself?" And he left them and went out to the city to Bethany and spent the night there. So he comes back. And before I get further, I want to quote something, because I think this was neat. I looked this back up, and God reminded me of this. If you turn to Romans chapter 1, verse 32, it says this, and this is where Jordan was kind of talking about Romans, as he was talking about in his series on Psalm, and he used this chapter also in his sermons the past 2 weeks. But the very end of that chapter 1, it says this: "For although they know the ordinance of God, and those who practice such things are worthy of death, not only do they do the same, but they also give a hearty approval to those who practice them." So, going back to the indignant, it's their hearts have become so hardened that they would give approval to anybody that's going to do what they want to do, because their lives are already messed up. And their lives are so messed up that, just like what Paul was writing here about the people in Rome and how they would continue to disobey God, and not only do they disobey God, but they give hearty approval to anybody else who disobeys God. That's what was going on here. The religious leaders liked what they were doing. They didn't want to fall in line and start loving God. They loved themselves better than God.
Well, it was a wealthy position too.
Yeah. It was a position of wealth. It was a position of prestige.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and again, one finger, you got three fingers pointing back at you. You got to think, why, if we don't share about Christ a lot, why not? Is there something in our lives, and I'm not saying this to judge anybody, because I got fingers pointing at me. The thing is what are we doing in our lives that either promotes Christ, bearing fruit, as we're going to see here later on, bearing fruit, or are we just kind of like, yeah, you know, I got my fire insurance, but that's where I'm at. I'm happy with that.
You got a couple lines in the sand.
Yeah, you got a couple lines in the sand. So the next morning,
You know, I've been thinking about what you asked me and the answer I gave you. Maybe the real answer is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The members of the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they had power,
mm-hmm.
and they weren't about to give it up for anything. And I believe personally they were absolutely corrupted. They were power hungry. All right, it's just as simple as that. All right,
It sounds like today, doesn't it?
absolutely.
Oh, it does.
Absolutely.
And you know, and we've written this before, and I'll probably say this, but this is a good reminder. What's in the middle of sin? I. You know, think about it, because that's what is sin. It's all about me. You know, anytime I put me ahead of God, period, in anything, it's sin.
You can read Proverbs and you can read about yourself all over the place.
God.
Right.
Just don't have to read about it twice.
So let's go on, verse 18.